Naledi Makona stood on the cold patio outside the huge glass doors of her family's mansion in Johannesburg. Inside, warm golden lights filled the house, and music played loudly while people laughed and toasted with expensive drinks. It looked like a perfect celebration. But Naledi wasn't part of it. Even though it was her own home, she had been told to stay outside. Her stepmother, Thandi Makona, had organized a glamorous dinner party for relatives and business partners. Luxury cars filled the driveway and well-dressed guests walked in carrying gifts and smiling for photos. Naledi had helped prepare everything since the morning, setting tables, arranging flowers and helping the caterers. Yet when the party started, Thandi looked at her coldly and said, "You can stay outside. You'll eat later." So Naledi sat quietly on a chair on the patio while the night grew colder. Through the glass doors she could see her stepsister Zanil laughing with cousins, showing off her expensive dress. Every now and then someone glanced toward Naledi and whispered something that made the others laugh. Hours later, when the party was almost over, a servant finally came outside holding a small plate. It wasn't fresh food. It was scraps left from the guests' table, half-eaten pieces of chicken, a little rice and cold vegetables. The servant placed the plate in front of her awkwardly and walked away. Inside, Naledi heard Zanil's voice laughing loudly. "That's enough for her," she joked. Naledi looked down at the plate, her hands slightly shaking from the cold. Anyone watching might think she was weak or powerless. But what everyone inside that bright, noisy house didn't know was that Naledi was carrying a secret that would soon turn their entire world upside down. Naledi had felt invisible in her own home for as long as she could remember. Things were not always like this. When her mother was alive, the house had felt warm and full of love. Her mother used to laugh loudly in the kitchen, hug Naledi every morning, and tell her she could become anything she wanted in life. But everything changed the year her mother passed away. The house became quiet, and the happiness seemed to disappear with her. A year later, Naledi's father, Sibusiso Makona, remarried. He was a successful property developer and always busy with business deals and travel. When Thandi moved into the big mansion in Sandton with her daughter Zanil, the atmosphere in the house changed completely. At first, Naledi tried to believe things would get better, but they never did. Thandi treated her own daughter like a princess. Zanil got expensive clothes, new phones and weekend shopping trips. But Naledi was treated very differently. Slowly, without anyone even saying it clearly, she became more like a servant in her own home. She was the one expected to wake up early, help the staff in the kitchen, clean the living rooms and prepare things whenever guests were coming. Whenever relatives or business partners visited, Thandi would give Naledi the same quiet instruction: "Stay out of the way." Naledi would disappear into the kitchen or go upstairs to her room while Zanil entertained everyone downstairs, laughing and acting like she owned the house. At dinner tables, Naledi often stayed silent while others talked about money, business and success. Sometimes it felt like no one even noticed she was sitting there. But what no one paid attention to was what Naledi did every night after everyone went to sleep. While the house became quiet, she would sit at her small desk with her old laptop. For hours she studied online courses about finance, investment and business. Sometimes her eyes burned from tiredness, but she kept going. Naledi had learned something important a long time ago. No one in that house was going to build her future for her. If she wanted a different life, she had to create it herself. And even though everyone treated her like she was nothing, deep inside Naledi knew she was quietly preparing for something much bigger. What no one in the Makona house knew was that Naledi was quietly building a life no one could touch. Behind her calm and obedient face, she was carrying a secret that could change everything. Years ago, before her mother passed, she had been entrusted with something incredible. Her mother had set up an international investment account for her. It wasn't just a small sum. It was money carefully invested in properties, tech companies and projects all across Africa. And over the years, it had grown into millions of dollars. Naledi didn't manage this on her own. Her mother had connected her with a trusted lawyer in Cape Town, Advocate Themba Dlamini. He guided her, taught her about investments and helped her make smart decisions, all in secret. They communicated quietly through encrypted emails and calls, far away from her father, stepmother and Zanil. Naledi learned how to track stocks, understand property markets, and even spot opportunities in tech startups. While everyone in the house thought she was just a quiet, obedient girl, she was quietly mastering the world of finance. She had good reason to keep it a secret. She knew her stepmother, Thandi, would have tried to take control the moment she found out. Thandi had always wanted to appear in control of the house, the money and the family's image. If anyone learned Naledi had access to millions, she knew they would do everything to snatch it from her. So Naledi stayed silent, smiled when she had to, and endured humiliation every day. She lived modestly, dressed simply, and let others mock her while she quietly watched and learned. Each insult, each snide remark only strengthened her resolve. She knew her moment would come, when she could step forward, show the world what she had built in secret, and take back her life on her own terms. Every late night as the house slept, Naledi worked on her accounts, checked her investments, and dreamed of the day when she would no longer be invisible. She had learned patience, strategy, and strength. And soon, very soon, everyone who had laughed at her would realize just how powerful she had become. It was a chilly winter evening in Johannesburg, and the Makona mansion was buzzing with excitement. Thandi had planned an over-the-top celebration to announce Sunil's engagement to a wealthy businessman. Golden lights twinkled across the sprawling house, and every corner was decorated with fresh flowers and expensive ornaments. Waiters carried trays of fancy hors d'oeuvres, and the scent of gourmet dishes filled the air. Guests laughed, clinked glasses, and posed for photos, all dressed in their finest clothes. Naledi, as usual, wasn't part of any of it. She stood on the patio with the staff, shivering under her simple coat. The cold bit at her cheeks, but she stayed quiet, watching the party through the glass doors. Inside, Sunil twirled in her designer dress, laughing loudly with cousins and family friends, showing off her sparkling engagement ring. One of the cousins noticed Naledi outside and, with a mocking grin, threw a plate of leftovers toward her. "This is good enough for you," they sneered. Naledi caught the plate and sat down, pretending to be unaffected, though her fingers trembled slightly from the cold. She focused on the scraps of food, chewing slowly, all while feeling the familiar sting of humiliation. Years of being overlooked, mocked, and pushed aside had made her strong, but the sting never fully went away. She didn't fight, didn't argue, she just endured, quietly waiting. Then, just as she took a bite, her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She pulled it out and saw a message from Advocate Themba Dlamini, her trusted lawyer from Cape Town. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the words. "It's time. The trust is officially yours. Everything is now under your name." For a moment, the cold patio, the mocking cousins, and the laughter inside faded. Naledi felt a rush of disbelief, excitement, and calm power all at once. The same house that had held her humiliation for years, the same people who had mocked her, was about to become hers in every way that mattered. That one message changed everything. In that moment, she realized the night she had dreaded for so long would be the night her life turned upside down. Naledi's hands shook as she stared at her phone. The message from Advocate Themba Dlamini flashed across the screen. "It's time. Your mother's trust has officially transferred everything to you." For a moment she couldn't breathe. She read it again slowly, making sure her eyes weren't playing tricks on her. It was real. After all these years of feeling invisible, ignored, and humiliated, everything had changed in an instant. Her mother, who had always believed in her even when no one else did, had left her more than just memories. She had secretly placed ownership of several major properties into a trust, including the very mansion Naledi had spent her whole life being pushed aside in. Every business, every apartment, every valuable investment her father thought he controlled was now legally hers. Naledi's mind raced. For years, Thandi and Sibusiso had strutted around the house as if they owned it, making decisions, throwing parties, and mocking her as if she had no place there. Sunil had flaunted her wealth and privilege, treating Naledi like a servant. But none of it had ever really belonged to them. Not legally. Not truly. She glanced at the warm, golden lights inside the mansion, at her stepsister laughing and twirling in her fancy dress, at the guests raising their glasses and clapping. For years Naledi had endured this. She had smiled politely, stayed silent, and accepted humiliation while secretly building a future that no one could take from her. And now, in a way, the joke was on them. Her heart pounded, not with anger, not with revenge, but with a quiet, unstoppable power. The house where she had once been treated like she didn't exist, the place where they had laughed at her, was hers. Every corner, every room, every expensive detail was now under her name. A slow, calm smile spread across her face. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. She felt unstoppable. The people inside, celebrating as if nothing mattered, had no idea that everything they were enjoying, everything they were proud of, legally belonged to Naledi. And tonight they were about to find out. Just minutes after reading the message, Naledi noticed a sleek black luxury car pulling up the driveway. The tires crunched over the gravel, drawing the attention of a few guests who had wandered near the windows. The car door opened and out stepped Advocate Themba Dlamini, carrying a thick stack of official documents under his arm. His presence alone made the security guards straighten up and exchange puzzled glances. Naledi rose from the patio chair, brushing off the chill in the air. Calmly she walked toward him, her movements steady, confident. She greeted him with a simple nod, her eyes sparkling with a quiet strength. The guests inside, still laughing and sipping champagne, began to notice the commotion through the glass doors. Their laughter slowly faded as curiosity replaced amusement. Phones were raised to peek outside. Whispers filled the air, and a strange tension spread across the party. Thandi, who had been standing near the center of the celebration, caught sight of the lawyer and immediately stormed toward the door. Her perfectly styled hair bounced as she pushed through the crowd, her face red with anger. "What is he doing here? Why is a lawyer at my party?" she demanded, her voice sharp and commanding. Guests turned fully toward the patio now, their smiles disappearing, sensing that something serious was happening. Naledi didn't flinch. She remained calm, almost serene, as Advocate Dlamini handed her the documents. The lawyer spoke quietly, firmly, but his words carried a weight that reached the patio and beyond. People could feel the change in the air, the shift from celebration to uncertainty. The music inside faltered, then stopped completely. Conversations died down. All eyes were on Naledi as she held the papers in her hands. It was as if the world had slowed for a moment. The same world that had ignored her, mocked her, and treated her like she didn't exist. And now, the eyes that had overlooked her for years were fixed firmly on her. For the first time, Naledi realized the party wasn't hers to endure anymore. It was hers to change. Tonight, everything inside that house would be different, and everyone would see that the quiet, invisible girl standing on the cold patio was no longer powerless. The patio was quiet now, the cold air heavy with tension. Advocate Themba Dlamini cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice steady and calm, but carrying the weight of something monumental. "Everyone here needs to understand the truth," he said, holding the thick stack of documents for all to see. Ms. Naledi Makona's late mother was the original owner of several properties, including this house. Before she passed, she created a legal trust to ensure that everything would transfer to her daughter when she turned 24. Heads turned toward Naledi, who stood straight and composed, holding herself with a calm confidence that none of the guests had ever seen before. Her stepsister Zanil's laughter had already faded, replaced by uneasy whispers, and Thandi's eyes narrowed as if trying to grasp what was being said. The lawyer continued, "That transfer has just been finalized. As of this moment, every property, every business, and yes, this house, legally belongs to Ms. Naledi Makona." The words seemed to hang in the air, refusing to be ignored. For a moment no one moved. The cousins who had mocked her earlier froze mid-smile. Zanil's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Thandi's face went from anger to disbelief as she stumbled backwards slightly, gripping the patio railing for support. Even Sibusiso, Naledi's father, looked stunned, his confident posture replaced by the realization that the empire he thought he controlled had never truly been his. The guests inside, who had been laughing and clinking glasses just minutes ago, now whispered nervously. Some gasped. Some stared in shock. The energy of the party shifted completely. The celebration had vanished, replaced by confusion and awe. Naledi didn't smile immediately. She simply stood there, quiet and composed, letting the truth settle in for everyone around her. The same people who had thrown scraps at her, laughed at her clothes, and treated her like she didn't matter were now faced with an undeniable fact. She was the owner of everything they had assumed was theirs. Finally, her eyes met Zanil's, then Thandi's. Calmly, almost effortlessly, Naledi realized the power of patience, of endurance, of quietly building strength when no one noticed. The laughter that had tormented her for years had been replaced by stunned silence. And in that moment, everyone understood. Nothing would ever be the same again. Thandi's confident smile vanished in an instant, replaced by a mix of shock and anger. She stepped back, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to process what the lawyer had just said. Sibusiso, her husband, looked completely stunned. His eyes widened and he took a step forward, almost as if hoping someone would tell him it wasn't true. For years he had acted like he controlled the family's entire financial empire, making decisions, throwing parties, and showing off his wealth. And now, in a single moment, he realized that it had never truly been his. Around them, the guests whispered nervously, their conversations filled with confusion and disbelief. The once lively engagement party for Zeniel had dissolved into chaos. People exchanged shocked glances, phones came out to capture the moment, and the hum of nervous chatter replaced the music that had played so confidently just minutes before. Some relatives who had laughed at Naledi earlier suddenly moved closer, trying to act friendly, their voices slightly too high, smiles a little too forced. A few even approached Naledi hesitantly, as if hoping to be on the good side of someone they had ignored and mocked for years. But Naledi didn't respond to their attempts. She stood tall, calm and composed, her hands relaxed at her sides. The quiet strength she had carried for years, the strength no one had ever noticed, was now visible to everyone. Zeniel, who had been the center of attention moments ago, froze, her engagement ring catching the light but no longer shining as brightly as her confidence. She opened her mouth to speak but nothing came out. Even Thandi seemed unsure whether to yell, cry or storm back inside. Naledi finally took a deep breath, feeling a mix of satisfaction and calm. This was the moment she had been waiting for her whole life, not just to prove her worth, but to show that patience, endurance and quiet intelligence could outlast arrogance, cruelty and mockery. The house that had been her cage, the family that had treated her like she didn't matter, and the people who had laughed at her humiliation were now forced to face a reality they could not deny. Naledi Makona was no longer invisible and she was in complete control. The energy of the party had shifted completely. Where there had once been laughter and arrogance, there was now tension, fear and respect, because Naledi had quietly claimed her victory and everyone could see it. Naledi finally took a step forward, her heart steady and her eyes calm. For the first time that night she spoke and everyone fell silent to listen. Her voice was quiet at first but firm, carrying a confidence that made people stop and pay attention. For years, she began, I have been humiliated, ignored and treated like I didn't matter. I have been told I am invisible, that my presence isn't important, that I should stay quiet and in the shadows. She paused, letting her words sink in, watching the reactions around her. Thandi's face turned red, Sibusiso's jaw tightened, and Zeniel's confident smile had completely disappeared. Even the guests who had whispered and giggled earlier now stared, unsure of how to respond. But through all of that, Naledi continued, I never forgot who I truly am. I never stopped believing in myself. I have worked quietly, I have learned and I have prepared. And tonight everything has changed. Her eyes swept across the patio, the same cold place where she had sat, shivering and eating scraps, now feeling like the center of power. She held up the stack of documents that Advocate Dlamini had handed her and let the weight of the moment settle. This house, these properties, everything my mother entrusted to me now belongs to me. And with that comes responsibility. There will be changes. Changes to how this house is run and changes to who is welcome here. A few people tried to murmur, but Naledi raised her hand slightly, not aggressively, just enough to hold their attention. Those who have shown disrespect, cruelty, or disregard for others will not have a place here. I will run this house with respect, fairness and dignity, values that some of you may have forgotten but I never did. The energy around her shifted completely. The patio, once the place of her humiliation, now felt like a throne. Naledi's calm, steady voice filled the air, leaving no room for argument. For the first time, everyone saw her true self. The quiet, invisible girl they had underestimated for years had grown into someone powerful, confident, and unshakable. In that moment, Naledi reclaimed more than just the house. She reclaimed her dignity, her voice, and her rightful place. The same patio where she had once been pushed aside was now the stage for her triumph. Everyone watching understood it clearly. Naledi Makona was no longer invisible and no one would ever doubt her again. Weeks after the shocking night, Naledi had turned the mansion into something meaningful. She created a foundation to help young women across South Africa, giving them scholarships, mentorship and support to pursue education and start their own businesses. The same house that had once been a place of humiliation now became a symbol of hope, opportunity and empowerment. Naledi chose not to stay in the mansion herself. Instead, she moved into a smaller, elegant penthouse in Cape Town. It wasn't about showing off wealth or getting revenge. It was about peace. She wanted a life where she could focus on what truly mattered, building her future, helping others and living on her own terms. One afternoon she walked along the ocean, the waves crashing softly against the shore. The salty breeze brushed against her face, and she thought back to that winter night on the cold patio. She remembered the laughter, the leftover scraps, the feeling of being invisible. But now, looking out at the endless horizon, she realized that night had not been the lowest point of her life. It had been the beginning of her greatest victory. All those years of patience, endurance and quiet work had led her here. Naledi smiled, letting the memories wash over her like the ocean waves. The people who had mocked her, the family who had ignored her. They had underestimated her, but their disbelief had only made her stronger. For the first time in her life, Naledi felt fully free. She had reclaimed her dignity, her power and her voice. And as she walked along the shore, she knew this was only the start of a new chapter. A life she had built herself, filled with purpose, peace and possibilities beyond anything she had ever imagined.